Preston Dennet. We've been talking with Preston for a while. He's been around for quite a bit, since 1986, where he discovered that his family, his friends, his co-workers were all having dramatic, unexplained encounters, but they weren't telling anybody about it because, well, the stigma around it. So they kind of keep it quiet. And then since then he's interviewed hundreds of witnesses, wrote 29 books, more than 100 articles on UFOs, paranormal, and his articles have appeared in numerous magazines and all over the place. He's like MUFON UFO Journal, Atlantis Rising Paranormal Magazine, and in a lot of languages as well, from what I can tell. He's also sold like 40 speculative fiction stories. So he's done also some fiction, which is really interesting. And Preston, when we spoke the last time, which was a while, me and him was quite a while ago, we talked about healing. And I think my good friend Preston is going to be talking about this today, healing and rescues by ETs, because there's significant evidence that he was telling me about that. So I'd like you, Preston, to come online here. Thank you. Now I can see your face, and tell us about what you've. Well, since then, maybe there's new information, but also like everything you've discovered so far on healing and UFOs. On to you.
Yeah, this is a subject I became interested in almost as soon as I started doing research way back in 1986, because I started uncovering my own cases of healing, people who have had a healing as a result of a UFO encounter. There was a lot of fear surrounding this subject. I don't think it was being accurately portrayed in the media. And I started to realize that healing is a big part of the UFO contact experience, and that, yeah, it was being not accurately portrayed, the whole contact experience. There was a lot of sort of a fear narrative, with people being sort of made to feel like this contact is something we should be afraid of, which turned out not to be the case at all. In fact, I found many, many cases of people who were healed, and that ended up becoming the first book I wrote on this subject, UFO Healings, which covered 100 cases. And I've since put out another book, The Healing Power of UFOs, which covers 300 cases. And it's not just healings, but people being helped in a wide variety of ways. Come to realize that the ET agenda, if you will, is really one of healing, guiding, teaching, warning, trying to wake people up to our own abilities, to our shared heritage, and this sort of thing. But I do have a little PowerPoint presentation that I would like to share with you guys, if that's all right. So let me see if I can bring that up here. Okay, you should be able to see that. Let me just get this on to slideshow mode. All right, can you see that? Assume yes.
Yeah, we're good, Preston.
All right. So yeah, I became involved in this field in 1986. This was the first article I wrote. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because I have a lot of information to share in only an hour. Here are some of the books. I've since written quite a few more, but this is the first book I wrote about healing cases, and quite a few of them. I was going to write an article, but I instantly found like 30 or 40 cases, and after doing more research, found well over 100. And started publicizing it and got a bunch more cases. This is Virginia Uranson. She also wrote a book about healings. There are quite a few books now coming out which describe the positive aspect of UFO contact. Here's Adrian DeVere, who wrote a book about how ETs have an agenda of healing, that many contactees themselves become healers, which is a huge part of this. So here's the latest book I wrote, and I can tell you that even within the UFO community, people have underestimated the actual number of cases of healings. This book came out a couple of years ago. I've since probably found twice the amount of cases. So we're approaching 1,000 documented cases. Gordon Creighton, a British researcher, was one of the first to document healing cases, and he wrote about it in the Flying Saucer Journal, outlining 10 or so cases of people who have been healed as a result of UFO encounters. I can tell you pretty much every major researcher out there who focuses on direct contact with ETs has cases of this kind, including Bud Hopkins, who never wrote about it, but I cornered him at a convention and he admitted that yes, he does have healing cases. Certainly David Jacobs does as well. He takes a somewhat negative viewpoint towards the whole contact experience, which I find interesting because he has cases of people who have healed of diphtheria, of pneumonia, of cancer, and more. John Mack, of course, has many cases involving healings. Edith Fiore, she's the first person with a PhD to write a book about the contact experience. She found that fully 50%, half of the people she interviewed had had healing as a result of a UFO encounter. Here's Barbara Lamb, one of my favorite researchers. She sent many cases my way of people who've been healed of heart conditions, back pain, flesh wounds, you name it. Brad Steiger, another major researcher, was found many, many healings. Yvonne Smith, she had a case of someone who was healed of the AIDS virus. Wendell Stevens has many, many cases involving a wide variety of healings. Here is Richard J. and Lee K. Boylan. They together wrote a book about positive UFO encounters, several of which include healings. So here are just some of the researchers out there who have documented healing cases. It's far, far more common, and it's not getting the attention it deserves. I think because the media really enjoys a lurid, fear-based story. And the UFO subject is already somewhat fringe on the outskirts of what we accept as normal, and healing cases are on the fringe of the fringe. So for that reason, they haven't gotten a lot of attention, certainly not the attention they deserve. But one thing I did realize very early on doing research is that many people who are taken on board describe the interior of UFOs in sort of medical terms, saying that it was like a doctor's room. The ETs themselves, they sometimes label as doctors. The physical exam is the most common thing people report. And the healings people report come in a variety of ways. Some people are outside and they are struck by a beam of light, quite a few cases like that. Some people are given medicine, taken on board. Most of the healings do involve some form of light. There's a type of evidence that we call medical evidence. And there are a lot of cases towards this. If you look in the MUFON UFO Journal Handbook, there's a section titled Medical Evidence, but it is titled Injuries, and it completely overlooks any healing cases, which is again is completely biased, because in fact we have more healing cases, I think, than actual injury cases. But medical evidence is important. It can make or break a case. Many people can show scars or marks on their body, which they can relate directly to a UFO encounter. Here are marks on a gentleman by the name of Mike Evans, who I interviewed, who had quite a few encounters. Implants as well is a big part of this. I've since found many cases involving implants where people have asked the ETs directly, what is the purpose of implants? And have been told that it's to monitor your vital signs, measure levels of pollution, boost the immune system, stabilize the health in some way. Don't think they're tracking devices or mind control devices, as has been speculated, without any real basis in fact by many researchers. But from the horse's mouth, the ETs themselves, they're saying that it is much more health related. Now, there are cases of injuries, and I looked into them. This is Mona Stafford, Louise Smith, and Elaine Thomas, who had a very harrowing onboard encounter in Kentucky which did involve some injuries. Here's Denise Bishop. She was struck by a beam of light, which was diagnosed as a laser burn by a doctor. Here's a very well-known case which took place in Canada involving prospector by the name of Stephen McCallick, who apparently got too close to a UFO and suffered what amounts to radiation burns. So yeah, there are many cases of injuries, certainly, but healing in these cases seems to be almost always intentional, and there's a lot more of them. Some of them occur in a person's house. The ETs will essentially come right to your home, your bedroom often, and enact a healing there. Much more common, about 50% of the cases, are people who are taken on board and healed during an exam. Some will just be driving outside, as I mentioned, or walking. We'll have a UFO hover over them, and the next thing they know, they're healed. Quite a few cases of this. Many cases of UFOs hovering around hospitals as well. This is a very famous case in Canada, the Cowichan Station Hospital, where this nurse, Mrs. Kendall, saw this UFO hovering right next to the children's ward. I think here's the hospital where this craft hovered. So about 10%, and this really shocked me, 10% of the cases of healings actually take place in a hotel room, or a hospital room. So as UFO researchers, we know that an encounter can happen pretty much anywhere, but that was really unexpected. But so many cases becomes impossible to ignore that, yes, this does take place. So let's get to some of the healing cases. Here's a really good one. It's very well authenticated, which took place in Damon, Texas, to two police officers, Officer McCoy and Officer Good, who had been called to a UFO report and saw this craft pictured here on the top hovering over a field. I said it was quite large. It immediately sent down a sort of purplish beam of light onto one of the officer's arms. He had his arm hanging out of the window, and he said he could feel the warmth from this beam of light, warm and tingling. Well, this officer had been bitten on his finger by a baby pet alligator and had a pretty nasty wound. It was swollen, it was painful, it was all bandaged up. And they raced away in fear, parked at a diner to talk about what happened. And that's when Officer McCoy said that he could no longer feel any pain in his finger and took off the bandage. And sure enough, this flesh wound was completely healed. Literally in seconds, it was healed by this beam of light. This was verified by Officer Good, who, by the way, has 50 officers underneath him. He's a superior officer, a very good witness. This case was very well authenticated. Here's another very famous case from Jacques Vallée, very well known in this field, who interviewed a medical doctor in France who saw a UFO hovering outside his home, and it struck him with a beam of light. Well, he was dazed by it, stumbled into his room, fell asleep, woke up the next morning to discover that he had been healed of two conditions. He suffered from partial paralysis from injuries received in the Algerian War years earlier. His paralysis was gone. He could now resume piano playing. He was pretty good at that. But he had also gashed his ankle with an axe while cutting wood 2 days earlier. That wound was completely gone. So there are a number of cases, somewhere around 20%, which involve multiple healings. Timothy Green Beckley had a really interesting case involving a gentleman, a journalist, who was in Prospect Park, New York. And he was with a group of people who had a UFO hovering overhead. And he was healed of a wound on his hand as well. He does not remember any missing time or being struck by any beam of light. It was just the mere presence of a UFO, which apparently enacted healing. Many, many cases of flesh wounds being healed. Here's another very famous case involving Sergeant Charles Moody, who had an onboard encounter in Alamogordo, New Mexico. He had a UFO land right next to him. He was basically pulled on board. He fought them. He was quite frightened. And during this tussle, he injured himself. And the ETs took him on board and basically used this cylindrical type instrument to heal his back. And he ended up having a very benevolent encounter once he got over the fear. You can see the drawing he did here on the top, which is very similar to what Travis Walton saw. So there are a couple of cases where people were injured during their encounter and the ETs still healed them. There is a term in this field called contactee versus abductee. I stopped using the term abductee because most of the people I interviewed do not like that term. They feel it's negative. And the term contactee is not much better, but it's one I prefer. This is a gentleman by the name of Richard Rilke, who's reported several healings. He says as a young boy, he got an ear infection, and ETs came and cured that. Throughout his life, he's had numerous contact. At one point, he developed a tumor on his forehead, and ETs came and healed it. And this was verified by more than 50 people who knew him. On another occasion, he was working at a factory and crushed his finger. And the nurse was absolutely shocked, told him he's probably going to lose this finger. He was rushed to the hospital. And while in the hospital room, his ET friends, who are human looking, showed up and took a handheld instrument that emitted a beam of light, which cured his flesh wound. He went to work the next day and absolutely shocked the factory nurse when he showed her his finger, which now showed no signs of injury. There was just one or two of these cases, it would be easy to dismiss. There are hundreds of them. Here's another gentleman, Jerry Wills, who is quite active in this field as a healer, and he reports contact throughout his life. As a very young boy, he was visited by this human-looking ET who taught him all kinds of subjects about science, spirituality, morality, all these different things. He now holds several patents. He's quite an intelligent guy. I've met him personally. He was visited by ETs as a young kid in his bedroom, suffering from a very severe fever. And he says, actually, it was Greys that came into his room and pulled him on board and healed him using lights and some sort of injection or some tool that he couldn't quite accurately describe. A lot of the witnesses do have trouble describing the instrumentation that ETs use because there's really no words for them. They are much different from the tools we use here. Leonard Stringfield is a very well-respected researcher. He has a wonderful case involving a 13-year-old boy by the name of Chuck Doyle from Florence, Kentucky, who was suffering from a severe head cold, went out into his backyard and saw this sort of manta ray-shaped UFO hovering over the neighbor's pool, shining down a beam of light. Suddenly, this beam of light began to play across the field and come towards him. He was terrified and he turned to run, and this beam of light struck him. He immediately was unable to move. He was standing at a 45-degree angle, sort of hovering right over the ground. He said all sorts of things rushed through his mind, mathematical equations, weird landscapes, geometric shapes, all kinds of information went through his mind. Much of it went over his head. The beam retracted, he fell to the ground, ran inside, told his mom, who ran outside just in time to see this craft moving away, and his head cold was gone. It's an interesting case because I don't know why ETs would travel wherever they're coming from to cure a little boy's head cold. But I can tell you, I've got a dozen cases like that where they have healed people of very minor conditions, such as a cold. Jim Sparks, also very well known in this field. He's had a couple of really interesting healings. On one occasion, he was suffering from the flu. He did not go to the doctor. Gray ETs showed up and told him that per their agreement, they said that they would come if ever he was in trouble. They chided him for not going to the hospital. They told him he was very near death and would probably die without intervention, and proceeded to heal him of the flu. At one point, he did have the famous anal probe, which is often joked about in this field. Actually doesn't happen a whole lot. I've only found a few cases over the years. They told him he was eating way too much meat. He was pretty much a carnivore, and that he needed to stop eating so much meat because it was clogging up his digestive system. And he did. And they took him on board again, gave him another probe. He says, "Why are you doing that?" "I stopped eating meat." And they said, "Yes, we know, and it's helping a lot." This is not the only case I have where people have been given dietary advice. One lady, she was suffering from kidney failure. She went to the doctor was horrified and said, "You need to go to the hospital, the emergency room right away. Your condition, as it stands now, could very well be fatal. You need immediate attention." Well, she went home to call her family and let them know what's going on, asked them to pray for her. She called friends. She told her employer that she won't be coming in, and she was going to go to the hospital, but she fell asleep on her bed, woke up to find short, brown-skinned beings massaging her abdomen. She was going in and out of consciousness. This went on for about an hour, she estimates. Woke up the next morning and was able to go to the bathroom, went immediately to the doctor, and he was completely baffled and said he must have misdiagnosed her. He didn't know what to tell her. He asked her what happened, and she says, "I don't know. I think maybe angels came." She didn't think it was angels, but this is what she told people. She got her answer or clarification, certainly, about a month later when she was pulled on board a craft, saw these same figures who told her that she had been cured. In fact, they put this device on her abdomen, which showed her a hologram of her kidneys. They said, "Look, your kidneys are fine." And then they moved it over to her liver, and it showed all these black spots. And they told her, "See all these black spots?" She said, "Yes." I said, "You need to stop drinking Diet Coke. It's damaging your liver." So there's another case of ETs giving dietary advice. Jim Sparks, pictured here, was a heavy smoker. ETs came in one day and told him that he needs to stop smoking. And they handed him this beaker filled with black goo. Said it stunk real bad. They said, "This is our gift to you." He said, "What kind of gift is this?" And they said, "We removed this from your lungs. You need to stop smoking." I later interviewed a gentleman who had the exact same experience. He was also told by the ETs not to smoke. They also told him that he has to stop smoking marijuana because this was not the life that they had planned for him. So many, many cases of healings. Many other people have seen people on board being healed. Edith Fiore interviewed two sisters who were taken on board. Both were healed of a yeast infection at one point. One of them was healed of breast cancer. This was the type of being that one of the sisters described who healed her using this type of instrument. So many of these instruments, involve lights. That is the primary way that people are healed. Here's another amazing case involving a gentleman by the name of Ventura Maceres. What a very well-documented encounter involving landing traces, multiple witnesses. He saw these ETs. He was struck by a beam of light from a UFO, and following his encounter, he began to grow a third set of teeth. Don't have a whole lot of dental healings, but they should certainly do turn up. And lest anyone be skeptical, this gentleman was interviewed by government officials, military officials, police officers, doctors, and UFO researchers, all of whom verified this healing. Here's another case which comes from Reporter Bob Teets, in his book West Virginia UFOs, involving a gentleman by the name of Daniel, who was suffering from an impacted wisdom tooth, he was taken on board and asked the ETs to heal him. There are not a whole lot of cases where people ask for healing and get it, but it does occur. And they told him that they would do it. And sure enough, the infection went away. I know another case involving a gentleman from Gainesville, Florida. Jim Law is his name. The gray ETs showed up. He didn't like it. He found these encounters frightening, but he had gotten over his fear. And when they surrounded his bed, he said, if you're going to come and take me, why don't you heal me of my hernia? He was scheduled for surgery for a pretty severe hernia. And they told him, and I quote, we know this condition of which you speak, and we will repair it. They used a handheld instrument and did it in literally seconds. After it was done, he was very impressed, Jim, and he said, why are you taking me? Why do you keep coming to me and taking me? And they told him, we are interested in your genetic potential to live a long time. He has longevity in his family. His grandfather is 106 years old, still spry, kicking, active. He has aunts who were in their 90s. I find this very interesting because there are a lot of cases involving contactees who enjoy excellent health, have had what they call health upgrades. Quite a few cases of this. And I also find it interesting that human longevity has essentially doubled over the past couple of hundred years. I can't say for sure that this is anything to do with ETs, but I wonder about it because I do believe that this is the main purpose people are being taken on board, is to uphold our genetics. And I say that because this is the information that's been given to contactees directly. So every part of the body has been healed, whether it's back pain or kidneys, heart healings, livers, all of it. And that includes, of course, the eyes. I've got 20 some cases of people who are healed of all kinds of conditions, such as detached retina, nearsightedness, farsightedness, you name it. There was a Peruvian customs official who was suffering from nearsightedness and was struck by a beam of light from a UFO, and he no longer needed to wear glasses. That case is from Ralph and Judy Bloom, and it also cured him of rheumatism, which he was suffering from in a chronic way. Here's Howard Menger. He's a somewhat controversial contactee who was on the island of Okinawa during the World War and had a bomb explode next to him, which basically put shrapnel in his eye, became infected. Both his eyes became infected. He became totally blind and had a nurse visit him in the hospital tent and told, administrated to him with a salve and told him that his vision would return. He asked about this nurse, and the doctors there denied that there was any nurse, but he would later go on board a UFO, hear this same voice, and realized it was the nurse that had visited him in this army tent on Okinawa Island. This is Anna Jamerson and Beth Collings. They wrote a book called Connections. I highly recommend it. They've had some harrowing experiences with UFOs that they don't particularly enjoy. One of them was told by the ETs, you need to stop eating so much fatty foods. You've gained too much weight. It's not healthy. She did not like being called fat by these grays. But interesting here is that one of them had an encounter and was cured of nearsightedness. And it was shortly after that that the other lady also had her vision suddenly improve. And it was this which prompted her to go under hypnosis. And she realized that she too was a contactee. So many, many different conditions involving the eyes. Here is police officer Alan Godfrey from England, who saw a UFO. It's a very well authenticated case. He had missing time. And despite the fact that many people in the area were calling the police station to report the UFO, when he reported it, he was badly ridiculed by his fellow officers and his superiors, and eventually had his police car taken away. He was given a bicycle, and the pressure was so bad on him, he eventually just resigned, which was so unfortunate because he had won multiple awards for his investigative work as a police officer, working with very intense cases involving murder and crimes and so forth. But he had, due to an assault, been diagnosed with infertility. He had suffered severe injuries, which made him no longer fertile. Well, one evening, his wife woke up in bed and heard this very loud humming noise right over the house. He wouldn't wake up. She fell asleep. The next morning, they woke up and he was able to be intimate with his wife. She became pregnant. Now, he accused her of sleeping around because he knew he was infertile. He had been diagnosed with infertility, but went to the doctor, and the doctor was very baffled because he says, I don't know how to explain this, but your condition has been reversed. That's one of about 10 cases I have involving people cured of infertility. Here's another very well-documented case, one of my favorite, involving a gentleman by the name of Carl Higdon, a hunter and oil worker from Rawlins, Wyoming, who was out with his friends hunting and got separated, saw a UFO and a humanoid figure, was pulled on board, saw animals on board, was apparently taken to their planet. It's quite a long, drawn-out case. And basically was returned. This object, by the way, was very small, but inside it was quite large inside, much bigger than it appeared on the outside. And other people in the area saw the UFO. His truck was found out in a field. There's a lot of good evidence to support this case. But most astonishing is when he went to the doctor, found out that he had been cured of two conditions. He had suffered from tuberculosis as a young man, and his lungs were badly scarred. All that was gone. His lungs were like new. Also, he suffered from kidney stones, and his condition of kidney stones was completely reversed. So that's another case involving two healings. Quite a few cases of kidney stones. Here's a really interesting case from Constance Clear. She wrote about it in her book, involving this young man by the name of Andrew, who was taken on board, and the ETs were baffled to see all these kidney stones in his body. And I asked him, are those there on purpose? He said, no, they're not. They're bad for me. They're going to hurt me. And they said, well, we will take you on board at a later date and remove them. And they did. And they used this device, which he drew here. Well, Constance Clear took this drawing and others that he did to a doctor, and the doctor was really impressed and said, oh yeah, this is exactly how we cure kidney stones, and had a word for litho, I forget the name for it, lithoscopy or something along those lines. But it was another interesting case involving someone who was cured of kidney stones. Now, a lot of cases. Here is Bill Hamilton III, really thorough UFO researcher. I've met him many times, and he had a very interesting case involving a woman from Southern California who is anonymous. She was diagnosed with a tumor, a cyst in her breast. We've got the before and after x-rays showing this tumor. Well, the day before surgery, and this is what often happens, I call it the last minute phenomena, ETs will show up right before a person has surgery. And they did. And she went to the doctor to have her operation, and they could not find the tumor. And again, this is medically verified. It was a case very much like this that I personally investigated, involving a lady who had a tumor in her fallopian tubes, was scheduled for surgery. That evening, had ETs enter into her bedroom. She doesn't remember what happened, but went to the hospital the next day for her scheduled surgery. They did the pre-op imaging, as they always do, and became quite upset and concerned because they could not find the tumor in her fallopian tube. And they asked her where had she gone for surgery. Now she denied it. She says, I didn't go anywhere. I didn't do anything. They did not believe her because they found what looked like a laser scar on her abdomen. And also the imaging showed fluid that was present in her fallopian tubes, which they said is only present if there has been surgery. But she absolutely denied it, did not want to talk to the doctors about what had happened. Most of the people I've interviewed, most of the cases I've researched, they do not tell their doctors for obvious reasons, because it's a very hostile climate in terms of ridicule and disbelief. But this lady pictured here had encounters. This is a very young girl, and she said the ETs have always been incredibly loving, very emotional, very nurturing to her. She also developed healing abilities. She was able to heal someone of pre-gestational diabetes, and another person she actually brought out of a coma. She did a healing on me. She asked if I would give her permission to do some healing work, and I said yes, of course. And she grabbed my feet, and I was actually able to run energy through the soles of my feet that you could physically feel. It was almost like an electric shock. It felt like water running up my legs. Chris Bledsoe, he's the author of a book, UFOs of God, very well known in this field, on the lecture circuit. I met him personally. I talked to him about his case. Very nice man, very sincere. Was suffering from Crohn's disease that was basically crippling. He was having to take enormous amounts of medication, and still it wasn't helping. His condition was considered chronic. He was wheelchair bound, but had gone out with his friends to this camping site with his son and several friends when UFOs showed up. It's a long drawn out encounter. They all saw these UFOs. He was taken on board and was cured of his Crohn's disease. He never had to take medication after that. This was the kind of condition that's absolutely impossible to fake. It was very well verified. It's one of the best verified healing cases on record. One case I found took place in England to Fred White of Durham, England. He was diagnosed with a hole in his heart and went to the hospital, and the doctors ordered immediate surgery. They said this was very serious. And this was when someone showed up in his hotel room, who he said was human looking, but quite exotic. The clothes were a little strange. His eyes were very large and hypnotic. He had a strange device on his wrist, which looked like a watch, but had no numbers or dials or anything. And this gentleman said that we are very interested in your work in electronics. Fred White was an inventor. And they said, you need to continue doing your work with electronics and we will heal you. And they did. And so that he just passed his hand over his chest a few times and all the pain went away. He could now breathe deeply and easily and walked out. Well, the doctors came in to wheel him into surgery. He said, wait, stop. Who was that doctor that came in? They could not identify him. He said, you need to go to surgery now. And he refused. He said, you need to do the imaging again. I'm feeling much better. I can breathe deeply. There's no pain. They were going to refuse, but he insisted, and they wheeled him in for more imaging, and the hole in his heart was gone. So yeah, quite a few heart healings. Katarina Wilson is a very well-known contactee who was struck by lightning, stumbled into her house, and fell into bed and was immediately pulled on board and given an operation by Grays, who told her that her heart had been severely damaged by this very close lightning strike, and put this device on her chest, which she drew, and healed her. Yeah, she went to the doctor, no sign of any damage to her heart. Here's one of my favorite cases involving John Hunter Gray. He was driving with his son through Richland Center, Wisconsin, when they had a UFO show up. It was very interesting because they had been to a gas station earlier and there was a very short little man there, completely covered with sunglasses, a fisherman's cap, a scarf, and looking at them with sort of beady little eyes, and followed them all the way to this abduction site, turned off the road right before this UFO landed, pulled them on board. It was a very brief encounter. They were both put in separate rooms, physically examined. John Hunter Gray said he was given injections or had these tools placed on various parts of his body and was let go. But following this, he started to lose weight. He was somewhat overweight. He started growing 5 o'clock shadow at twice the normal rate. His fingernails and toenails grew. Scars disappeared. He stopped smoking. He ended up counting about 20 different physiological improvements. He grew another inch. His feet grew a full size. So a really interesting case involving what we would probably term a upgrade. RD6 Killer Clark had a case of a gentleman who was a bicycle racer. He was pulled on board and left without any memory of the onboard segment, but following his onboard experience, started winning all his bicycle races. He said he was made stronger and faster as a result of his encounter. So this is John Hunter Gray getting injections by the Gray type ETs. What I did find is over 50% of the healings are done by Grays, but it involves all different types, mantids, human-looking, strange humanoids of all kinds. And there was another case, this is from Edith Fiore, involving a gentleman, a young man who had angioma. This is a malformation of the blood vessels in the brain. Doctors thought he would die because he started to become paralyzed, lost his ability to speak. They said blindness would come next and that he would probably pass away. And suddenly his condition was completely reversed. Doctors were so baffled, they ordered exploratory surgery and found that the malformations of the blood vessels in his brain were gone. It was now completely normal. And it was years later under hypnosis that this gentleman recalled being taken on board. ETs sort of removed the top of his skull, used these instruments to fix the malformation of the blood vessels in his brain and put it back on. Here's a drawing of one of the ETs he said he saw. Very unusual, not your typical Grays. So many cases of people being cured of liver disease as well. There was a series of cases in Georgia, in Russia, as written about by Helga Morrow, whose father was involved in the UFO field. And she said that there was so many cases there of healings that people were basically lining up, hoping that UFOs would come and heal them. This book, Secret Vows, is all about the Twiggs family, who all of them have reported one healing or another. Bert Twiggs was healed of flu. They again told him that he probably would have died if they hadn't gone to the hospital, but they intervened, the ETs, and healed him. Denise Twiggs was healed of cesarean scars after having a cesarean birth, and the young son was healed of asthma. This is Sisto Paz Wells, a very well-known contactee. In Wisconsin, he did a sort of UFO stakeout. The group of people where UFOs showed up, and that night, one of the gentlemen, a professional dancer, who suffered from arthritis to the point that he had to quit dancing, his legs were very much swollen, woke up with his pajama bottoms removed, and when he woke up, his legs were now normal. Absolutely no swelling whatsoever. His arthritis was cured. Cynthia Hind had a case in Africa where two ladies, a mother and daughter, were driving along, were taken on board by human-looking ETs. They were told that our planet will be suffering all kinds of future Earth changes and catastrophes, and they healed the daughter of hepatitis, jaundice, which was quite a severe condition. Got quite a few cases of this, one involving a very elderly lady from England in her 70s, late 70s, who was cured of jaundice. This is Michael Carter. This case is so interesting. I interviewed him personally. He was suffering from a blood clot in his leg. Went to the doctor. The doctor was absolutely horrified. He said, "You should have come much earlier. This is life-threatening. This is going to take months to cure you." Put him on a cocktail of medicines because his leg was swollen to twice its normal size. So there's a big danger here that you will not survive this. And it was just a few days later, a few days before the next checkup, that what we would call human-looking ETs showed up. He said that they were quite tall, 6.5 feet, blonde hair, blue eyes, and healed him using mind power rather than any instrumentation. About 10% of the cases, it's more of what we would call a hands-on healing rather than using technology. But he said this blue light came out of this gentleman's hands and struck him on the face and chest and basically knocked him out. And he woke up the next morning and his leg was back to normal size. And in fact, the veins looked like they had been rerouted. He went to the doctor. The doctor was absolutely amazed, said, "What happened?" And Michael Carter did not tell him, said, "Please just be happy for me." What I like about this case is it gave me the answer as to who's being healed and why, because I could not figure that out. It's evenly divided between men and women, and people of all ages, people of all ancestries, people of all blood types, political affiliation, religious, education, geographic location. None of these showed any real patterns. What I did find is about 50% of the people who are being healed do have a history of encounters. That's certainly true in Michael Carter's case. I also found that many people who have healings or contact in general are also profoundly psychic. So that's certainly a pattern. But when I asked Michael what he did for a living, he basically explained that he's an author. He was previously an actor, but mostly he is a activist against racism, and in fact was awarded by President Clinton for his work against racism. That really rang a bell because that case I cited earlier with John Hunter Gray, he was a social worker fighting for Native American rights. I started looking at all the cases I have of healings, and there were a lot of people who were doctors or nurses or inventors or police officers or musicians or environmentalists. And I started to realize, oh, okay, the people who are being healed are people who are doing good work for humanity. And this has actually come up directly from the ET's mouths in a few cases. One lady I interviewed from Norway had Grays come into her house and healed her of chronic back pain from an earlier injury. And she had no history of encounters. And I was going through her case trying to figure out why was she healed when she explained that she was very active in human rights and animal rights in her country, very well known. She asked me, please do not use her name because people would recognize her. And of course, anonymity is always respected, but it was another more confirmation that the people who are being healed are people who are doing good work for humanity in some capacity. So I'm not sure how much time I have. I don't have my clock in front of me. So if you could give me a shout out if I'm approaching the end of my time, I'd appreciate it.
Go ahead, Preston. You got another 10 minutes or so.
Okay, that's what I'm aiming for. Okay, I'll wrap this up in about 10 minutes. Here's another case from Wendell Stevens involving a gentleman who is a hospital doorman, João Valerio. And turns out that there, in that hospital, a child had suffered a cerebral aneurysm, which was considered fatal. They did not expect him to survive. But as João Valerio was quite well known and very respected and clearly an honest and sincere person who was well known for his contacts, the doctors asked him if he could contact the ETs and see if there was anything that could be done for this young man who had the cerebral aneurysm. And he said he would ask. And he did. Here's the ETs. And they told him that, yes, we can we can help. And they gave him this substance to rub onto the boy's body. And they said, just rub it into his skin and it should go right into his skin. And this is what they did. And it worked. His whole circulatory system was basically rebuilt or healed, much to the astonishment of the doctors who could not figure it out. But they did save a sample of this substance, which they said was in appearance very much like shards of raw sugar. It melted at room temperature. They subjected it to a chemical analysis, and it came out as chemically unique. So they could not find any real answers as to what this substance was. It appeared to be organic, but even then they couldn't be sure. They were not able to identify it, despite spending thousands of dollars on a chemical analysis. Many different types of healings. Again, David Jacobs had a case of a young girl who was healed of diphtheria. Doctors expected her to pass away, but she was taken into a craft and had lights shone down on her and was cured of diphtheria. Dean Anderson from Wisconsin saw a boy who was healed of muscular dystrophy in much the same way. Many cases involving healings of cancer as well. This is a lady from Florida, Lynn Plaskett, a councilwoman who was suffering from lymphoma and had this sort of small ball of light come into her room, but it was structured. It had some structure to it, metallic structure. And it went around her bed. It levitated her, went around her body. She could feel heat from it. It laid her down. And she thought, well, this is a good sign because she got a really good feeling from it. And following this, her cancer reversed itself and she was cured. Here's another gentleman I interviewed who has a long history of contact, Jim Schaefer, and he was diagnosed with a cancerous tumor on his neck. Well, he was filming, he's got a lot of evidence. He filmed these orbs in his house, and he was able to capture one of these on film as it, moving film actually. Here's a still frame from it. As this orb appeared, went into his room, came down and plunged into his chest. And he immediately fell asleep, woke up the next morning, looked in the mirror, and his tumor was gone. He was scheduled for surgery about 3 days later, went to the doctor, and the doctors were amazed because this tumor was no longer present. In fact, they couldn't find any cancer. What they did find was necrotic tissue. So they went ahead with the operation and removed the necrotic tissue, but no, there was no more cancer. He was very upfront with his doctors, told them exactly what happened. They couldn't say ETs cured him because obviously they could not completely verify that. I believe he sent me his medical records. They put something like miraculous healing or unexplained remission in his files. And there are some really interesting cases involving animals as well. Ray Hernandez is very well known in this field. His little dog Nina was suffering from heart failure and arthritis and had to be put down, but had a UFO show up and his wife was there. She saw it. Apparently she had missing time. But the next morning, this dog was completely healed. This is one of several cases I have of people whose pets were healed. Horses, roosters, a variety of animals, dogs mostly. But many different types of animals are being healed as well. This is Joy Davies, who was taking a walk in her backyard through this forest area in Pennsylvania when she came upon a glowing football-shaped craft with little men around it. She said they were very friendly. They invited her on board with her dog. She saw this ball of light. It was a very brief encounter. She doesn't remember a whole lot, except suddenly waking up and walking away and into her house. When she woke up the next morning, her arthritis was gone. She was able to do tennis playing again. But she noticed her dog, who was also quite old and limping around, was much more lively, much more active, and seemed to have been cured of arthritis as well. So looking into these cases, most of them are being done with beams of light. And during my research, I found over 50 cases of people who were cured as a result of a lightning strike, including Mary Clamser, who was suffering from multiple sclerosis, was struck by lightning, and it reversed her condition. Now, I'm just putting this out there because this is sort of further confirmation that we don't know enough about the electromagnetic spectrum, but it apparently in some cases can be used to heal people. And we are now just beginning to realize this. We are using lasers to cure detached retina. We are using electromagnetic stimulation to speed up the healing of broken bones. This apparently is how these healings are taking place. The ETs are accelerating the healing process that the body does naturally. Mind you, I'm not recommending anyone go out into a lightning storm. You're much more likely to suffer damage as opposed to being healed. But it's certainly interesting that there are a bunch of cases. And I want to cover very briefly cases of people being rescued, because there are a lot of them. It's not just healings. People are being rescued from various life-threatening situations. I interviewed one lady, a real estate broker who became a psychiatrist, who was, as a young woman, driving through the Watchung Mountains of New Jersey and wrecked her motorcycle. She thankfully was uninjured, but she was on a remote mountain road and it was very cold and she was stranded and there was no cars likely to come by. And this is when her quote friends showed up. She's a lifelong contactee. And this was the only time that she'd seen them fully consciously on Earth. She has memories of them showing up in her bedroom, of being on board, but nothing like this, where these guys showed up, walked up to her motorcycle and told her to step back. Her motorcycle was damaged. This was an old-fashioned motorcycle with a Kickstarter, but the Kickstarter had been bent to a degree that she was unable to start her bike. Well, one of them told her to step back while the other bent down and actually fixed the Kickstarter on her motorcycle with his hands. They stepped back, motioned for her to get on the motorbike, which started perfectly, and off she drove. She regrets now not stopping and trying to communicate more with them. They never said anything, but she says these were very much human looking, probably could have passed on the street for human if they wore sunglasses and a hat, so perhaps hybrids, but absolutely saved her when she needed it most. There was another case involving a family who was on a boat in one of the most severe hurricanes in the Pacific, which sunk more than 50 boats, and several people lost their lives. This was during a boat race, an armada. So a lot of people were out there. And this one boat was about to sink. It was called the Ramtha. And they were in radio contact with the Coast Guard, who could not find them because there were so many electromagnetic, it's called EPIRBs. These are little homing devices which allow the Coast Guard to track a craft, an emergency signal. But there were so many going off, they did not know where this boat, the Ramtha, was. And they could see the ship, but the ship could not see them. And this is when a UFO showed up right over their craft. And the rescue boat said, well, we don't know, but is that you firing off a flare? They said, no, that's not a flare. We don't know what it is, but it's right above our boat. And so the rescue boat went straight to that area and were able to pull this family off this boat, which sank an hour later. So they most certainly would have lost their lives. And there's more than one case like that of people being rescued while at sea. Several cases of people being saved from car accidents. This lady wrote a book about her encounters. She was driving through the desert after visiting her mother when a UFO showed up and stalled her car for about 10 minutes and then went off, and she continued on her way and was about to get on the freeway. There was a massive accident. She felt certain that she would have been in it had she not been delayed. And quite a few cases of this. There was another lady who was in Nevada and was being assaulted by a criminal, like, a not good man. And he was definitely going to do terrible things to her when a UFO showed up and scared him off. She went running towards the UFO. He went running the opposite direction, but she absolutely credits this UFO to rescuing her from being assaulted. One more case, there's a lot of them, so I could do a whole hour on just rescues. But a gentleman, a group of people went out snowmobiling in a very famous city known for snowmobiling. It's considered the snowiest city in the United States, certainly in Montana. And they had gone snowmobiling and gotten lost. And this gentleman was out snowmobiling when a UFO showed up. This was during a blizzard. And it seemed to be trying to get his attention. And so he followed it. And he followed it right to these people who had become lost and stranded and were hypothermic. He showed up just in time to lead them out of the situation. Quite a few cases of that as well, people being led out of the wilderness. And it goes beyond that. ETs will impart information to people, whether it's how to build a UFO detector or some type of healing device. The Integratron, located in the deserts of Southern California, is a good example. Contactee George Van Tassel was given information on how to build this device, which they told him, the ETs, was basically an anti-aging device, which would help give people energy. Unfortunately, he died just before it was completed. His plans were scooped up by unknown government agents, and it was never completed, but it still stands today. Whitley Strieber, he's reported on several cases. He says he gets letters all the time of people requesting healings, which is quite sad because he's not able to do that. It's normally done on the ET's own terms, but there are cases. I know of one lady who was suffering from breast cancer and prayed to God to be healed, and instead little gray ETs showed up and healed her of breast cancer. So this is just a tiny portion of the huge number of cases of this kind, quite a few of them, well more than the 300 I've documented here. And I've got a list of all the healings that have been done. And I can't say it covers every single medical condition, but certainly every part of the body, from skin to every organ system, whether it's kidneys or livers or lungs or heart or brain, injuries certainly, very serious illnesses such as diabetes or, I mean, you name it, it's been cured. So this is a very important aspect of contact that I think deserves far more attention. It really, I think, speaks to why the ETs are here. I don't think they're here to harm, hurt, scare, take over our planet. In fact, an objective, and I'll underline that, an objective look at the onboard UFO experience shows a very encouraging pattern of contact. Because people, yeah, they're examined, and this is the worst I hear, can be very frightening for people, and they will label it as a negative experience. But after that, they will give you a tour of the craft. They will take you to the engine room and explain in detail how it works, to the point where people are actually filing patents on how to build energy-free motors. I did a whole study of that. They will take you up to the control room, teach you how to fly the craft. They will take you up to the observation deck, show you a field of stars or the Earth or Saturn or other planets. And if you get any communication from the ETs, it will be about guidance in your own personal life or warnings against nuclear proliferation, war and aggression, or destruction of the environment and pollution or upcoming earth changes. So I think if you take an objective look at the ET contact, you will see that it's very, very encouraging and that they are not here to cause harm. So that's my presentation. I want to thank you very much. And if we have time, I'm certainly open to any questions, but I want to thank you very much.
Thank you, Preston.